Flight Lieutenant James Hartley sat in the cramped cockpit of his Rolls-Royce-powered Lightning jet, watching the stars above the English countryside begin to fade as dawn approached. It was early September 1962, and the entire world seemed to be holding its breath. The Cold War was growing colder by the day, with American U-2 spy planes regularly flying over hostile territory, capturing photographs that could change the course of nations. But James had a different mission tonight. He had orders to push his jet higher than any British aircraft had ever gone before, to 88,000 feet, almost the edge of space itself. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the control stick. Below him, the English Channel spread out like a sheet of black glass, and ahead lay the unknown. The base commander's words still echoed in his mind, "Hartley, if you don't make this flight, we'll never know what the Americans are truly seeing from up there." Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. James had spent 15 years in the Royal Air Force, and he had never felt pressure like this before. The Americans had been flying their U-2 spy planes for years, always staying just out of reach, hovering at heights where no ordinary fighter could follow. Now, with international tensions rising and the world watching every move, the British government wanted proof that their own jets could match the performance of American machines. They wanted to show the world, especially the Americans, that Britain still had the cutting edge of technology. James understood the weight of that responsibility. He was not just flying a mission. He was flying for his country's pride. As his Lightning climbed higher and higher, the engine roaring with a power that seemed almost alive, James felt his heart pounding harder than it ever had. The cockpit grew colder, and his breathing became heavier inside his oxygen mask. At 50,000 feet, most pilots would have felt terrified. But James pushed forward. At 60,000 feet, the sky outside his window had transformed from blue to purple to an almost black void. At 70,000 feet, he could see the curve of the earth below him, and for a moment, all his fear vanished. He was alone in a place where very few humans had ever been. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. "Still climbing," he reported calmly to ground control, though his voice shook with emotion. "Passing 75,000 feet. All systems nominal." The words felt hollow in the silence of the upper atmosphere. At exactly 87,500 feet, something unexpected happened. James's radar screen lit up with a signal he had not expected to see. Another aircraft was nearby, but that was impossible. According to his briefing, he should be completely alone up here. His eyes narrowed as he studied the blip on his screen. It was moving in a pattern he recognized. It was a U-2, an American spy plane. Right here, right now, sharing his patch of sky. James's mind raced. Had the Americans known he was coming? Was this a coincidence? Or was something else happening? He keyed his radio with a dry mouth. "Ground control, I have a contact. I repeat, I have a contact at my altitude. It appears to be a U-2. There was a long pause. Then the controller's voice came back, tight with tension. "Say again, Flight Lieutenant. Did you say a U-2? The two aircraft danced through the thin upper atmosphere, neither pilot able to see the other clearly, but both knowing exactly where the other was. James had trained for combat scenarios, but this was different. There was no order to engage. There was no hostility in the radio signals. Yet there was something electric in the air, a sense that history was being written in real time at 87,500 feet. The U-2 pilot, an American named Captain Dennis, transmitted a message that was both casual and profound. "Well, well. Looks like the Brits can fly higher than we thought. Welcome to the top of the world, James." James could not help but smile inside his oxygen mask. Despite the tension between their nations, there was a recognition between two men who had pushed their machines and their courage to the absolute limit. "Thank you, Dennis," James replied. "Seems like we both had the same idea tonight." For the next 7 minutes, at an altitude that seemed to exist between Earth and space, the two pilots shared radio communications that would never make headlines. They talked about their aircraft, their training, the incredible view of the planet below them. They spoke like brothers separated by an invisible line of politics and protocol. Dennis asked James how the Lightning handled at this extreme height. James asked Dennis what it felt like to know he was flying over enemy territory at this very moment, photographing secrets from above. "Some days I don't think about it," Dennis answered quietly. "Other days, I can feel every person down there watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake." James understood completely. He too had always carried that weight, the weight of flying for something bigger than himself. As dawn broke across the horizon in a spectacular explosion of orange and gold, James made a decision. He pushed the Lightning even higher, achieving a new record of 88,000 feet, higher than any British aircraft had flown before. The altitude was almost unimaginable, the air so thin that he could barely control his jet anymore. His instruments were at their limits, and his body was screaming from the physical and emotional strain. But there was a moment of pure triumph. He had done it. Britain had done it. As he began his slow descent back toward the English Channel, Dennis transmitted one final message. "Well flown, James. Well flown indeed. See you down at sea level sometime." James did not know if that would ever happen, given the world they lived in, but he hoped it might. When James touched down at his airbase near Dover at 7:42 a.m., he was exhausted but alive with a sense of achievement he had never experienced before. 12 ground crew members rushed toward his aircraft, shouting and cheering. The base commander was waiting for him, his face split wide with pride. But James said nothing about the encounter with the U-2. He filed his official report with careful words that said nothing about Dennis or their conversation. Some things, he understood, were meant to exist only between two pilots who had briefly touched the face of heaven. The newspapers would report only that a British Lightning jet had set a new altitude record. The world would read about it as a victory for British aviation. But James would remember the true story, a moment when two enemies had become friends for just a few minutes, united by their courage and their shared understanding of the vast, beautiful and terrifying universe that existed above the clouds. Years later, long after the Cold War had ended, James would learn that the American pilot, Dennis, had written the same thing in his own classified report, encountered British Lightning at extreme altitude. No hostile intent. Remarkable aircraft. Remarkable pilot. The two men never met officially, and they never flew near each other again. But they had left their mark on history together. A small moment of humanity in the midst of global tension, proof that even in the darkest times, two people could look at each other with respect and recognition. When James retired from the RAF in 1978, that was the moment he cherished most. Not the record, not the fame, but the memory of sharing the edge of space with another human being, and finding understanding instead of conflict.